Get me something in the air. Anything. Now. The colonel's voice tore through the operations center. His men were trapped. No aircraft ready. No time left. Then a deep rumble rolled in from above. An A-10 Warthog ripped across the sky. Unauthorized. Unscheduled. Unmistakable. The floor shook. Coffee splashed. Every monitor flashed red. She wasn't listed. She wasn't cleared. She wasn't supposed to exist. 12 soldiers tilted their heads upward in disbelief. Is that air support? She didn't ask. She didn't wait. She flew straight into the storm, breaking silence, breaking orders. She came anyway. This is Veteran Biker. If you're new here, hit 1 in the comments. If you've been here a while, type 2. If you ride with us every week, drop a 3. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around until the end. Fort Reagan's command center was never a place for calm. It was built on pressure, where lives were decided under cold fluorescent lights. Before sunrise, the room buzzed with restless energy. Dozens of officers hunched over screens. Every face washed pale in green and amber glows. The smell of stale coffee mixed with the heat of overworked machines and the heavy weight of tension. Colonel Marcus Ellison stood in the middle, his eyes locked on the tactical display. The map showed a single pulsing red icon, Echo Unit 3, a recon squad, just 12 men, trapped inside the kill zone marked -4 Zambian Kwacha. The comms were broken, filled with static, but the pieces were enough. They were surrounded in a ravine, taking relentless fire. The last message was short, cut off by explosion. One final plea for help. Comms. Update. Ellison's voice was tight, but steady. The communications officer, barely holding his hand still, glanced at his screen. Sir, transmissions are unstable. The enemy is jamming the signal. Last message was a request for immediate air cover. They said they're out of time. The words froze the room. Everyone knew what that meant. Ellison didn't need images. He had lived it. Pinned down. No cover. Fire closing in. He felt it like ice in his stomach. Air assets, he demanded. What's available? The flight officer, calm but direct, rattled off the facts. Sir, F-35s are grounded. Systems issue still unresolved. The F-18s are at Auxiliary Field C. 9 refueling for Operation Sandstorm. Mission priority can't be canceled. Weather north of -4 Zambian Kwacha is a microburst storm. Low altitude runs are impossible. We have nothing. Closest possible support, 42 minutes minimum. Ellison clenched his jaw. 42 minutes meant Echo 3 was gone. Protocol said to wait, to prioritize the larger mission. But leaving 12 men to die felt like poison. His fist slammed the table. Damn the book. To hell with protocol. I don't care about the logistics report. Find me anything that flies, jet, chopper, hell, even a prop plane. Something that can get over that valley, and give those men 5 more minutes. The room shifted. Officers sprang into action, typing furiously, scanning for possibilities. It was desperate, but no one hesitated. Then, from the back of the room, a young staffer spoke up quietly. Sir, we have one pilot ready. An A-10, fully fueled, armed, waiting. Ellison turned slowly. His face was stone. An A-10? His voice dripped with disbelief. That relic? A flying bulldozer? That thing belongs in a museum. His frustration spiked. I asked for precision. I need a stealth fighter, not some rusty hammer with wings. He waved the officer off and turned back to the map. Reality had closed in. 40 minutes until support. Then paperwork. Then another family told their son didn't make it. But before he could settle into that bitter truth, the radar tech's voice broke the silence. Miller, a seasoned operator, leaned over his console. Sir, new contact. The room froze. ID it, Ellison ordered. No transponder. No IFF. Not a glitch. It's real. Low altitude. Hugging terrain. Moving fast. Heading straight for -4 Zambian Kwacha. Dozens of eyes locked on the radar display. A green blip cut across the map with speed and purpose. Ellison knew that signature, that reckless, precise pattern. That wasn't a rookie, and it wasn't an authorized flight. His blood went cold. This wasn't just a pilot. It was a predator. For Colonel Ellison, this wasn't just another blip on the radar. It was a ghost from his past. He turned toward the young officer who had dared to suggest the A-10. The kid looked pale, eyes wide, caught between fear and awe. His whisper wasn't meant for Ellison, but for the entire room. There's only one pilot who flies like that, and she's not supposed to be alive. The words hit like a trigger. Memories he had buried years ago came flooding back. Operation Red Dagger. He remembered the blackout, the enemy jammers that silenced their radios, the desperate cries for help from a squad pinned down. Just like today, F-18s were too far, F-35s were grounded. And then came the order from above, stand down. Wait, but one pilot refused. A young woman, fearless and relentless. Elena Marquez. Call sign, Falcon 7. Ellison could still picture her flight path on a radar that day, her A-10 Warthog diving straight into chaos. She ignored every order, every threat of court-martial, and flew blind, guided only by instinct and her view of the battlefield. The system punished her for it, grounded, stripped of her rank, career destroyed. But 19 men walked out alive because she chose them over protocol. And now, staring at the glowing green slicing across his screen, Ellison knew it was her. Same reckless flight path. Same refusal to obey logic. Falcon 7 was answering Echo 3's cry for help just like she had years ago. Ellison's chest tightened. Awe, fear, and reluctant respect warred inside him. Nothing he said could stop her. The game had just shifted, and the peace no one was supposed to have was suddenly in play. The room went silent. The only sound was the dull hum of server racks. Every officer's eyes locked on that radar. Whispers echoed, "She's not supposed to exist." Ellison stood rigid, a commander bound by rules, yet trapped by a contradiction he could no longer ignore. His inner voice shouted at him, "She's a liability, a rogue, a threat to order itself." But another voice whispered, "She's the only chance those men have." Ellison's hand trembled as he grabbed the comms mic. His voice cut through the silence like steel. "Unidentified A-10. State your ID and return to base." That's a direct order. Static. The radar tech, Miller, looked up with unease. "Sir," she's silent. Either she's not receiving, or she's ignoring us. But her course is locked on Echo 3. Ellison's jaw clenched. It wasn't a mistake. It was her choice. He tried again, his tone low and sharp. "Falcon 7, I know who you are. You are not cleared for this mission. Return to base or I'll classify you as hostile." They both knew the truth. He could never order a missile fired at an American pilot trying to save American soldiers. His threat was empty. Then, through the static, a calm female voice broke through. Clear, steady, unshaken. "This is Falcon 7. I hear you, Colonel. Echo 3 needs help. I am in position." There was no arrogance, no anger, just certainty. She wasn't asking permission. She was stating the mission as she saw it. The room fell into painful silence. Ellison's mind spun. He could cling to the rules, demand she return, and watch Echo 3 be wiped out. Or he could accept reality. Those soldiers would not survive without her. At that moment, the comms console crackled with a desperate voice from the battlefield. "Any air support at all, please. We're out of time." Taking heavy fire. The cry tore through the command center. Ellison's eyes snapped from the tactical map, where Echo 3's red icon was being swallowed by enemy markers, to the radar, where Falcon 7's blip was closing fast. His fist slammed the console. His voice broke the stalemate. "Falcon 7, you are cleared to engage." He didn't wait for a reply. He knew she was already diving. She had stopped waiting for orders years ago, after the day when waiting had cost lives. The entire room held its breath. The green blip on the radar disappeared as she dropped lower, hugging the terrain, vanishing into the fog like a ghost. On the ground, Echo 3 crouched behind a bare rock formation, out of ammo, waiting for the end. Their eyes searched the gray sky, hoping for a savior they no longer believed was coming. But Falcon 7 was already there. And then it came. Not the distant scream of a high-altitude fighter, but a low, savage growl that shook the earth. Out of the smoke and fog, the unmistakable shape of an A-10 Warthog cut through the sky, flying so close to the terrain it looked like it was part of it. On the ground, a sergeant shouted with disbelief and joy at once. "That's a Warthog. We got air support. We've got air." Inside the op center, every head turned toward the radar screen. Miller, the seasoned radar tech, could barely find his words. "She's flying on visual, sir. In this fog, with this much smoke, there's no way she can lock targets." But the next sound silenced him. Not bombs, not missiles. The thunder of the GAU-8 Avenger cannon. The narration cut in. The GAU-8 wasn't just a gun. It was a beast of destruction. 7 barrels spinning, pouring nearly 4,000 rounds a minute. The noise wasn't like a single explosion. It was like the sky itself tearing open. On the radar, enemy positions began vanishing. One by one, hidden artillery nests lit up, turned into fire and smoke. Echo 3 soldiers, pinned against the rocks just moments earlier, began to cheer. Their cries of relief and disbelief poured back through shaky comms. Colonel Ellison stood frozen, the roar of the cannon echoing in his chest. His dread mixed with respect. Miller had been right. No modern jet could have gotten a lock in the soup of fog and interference. This wasn't technology. This wasn't automated systems. This was raw skill. Fly by instinct, by eyesight, by nerves of steel. Ellison knew the truth. It wasn't just flying. It was mastery. The scene slammed him back into memory. Operation Red Dagger. A mission burned into him forever. A small recon team, surrounded. Comms down. Jammers blanketing the field. The book had set abort. Too dangerous. Too costly. He remembered giving the order to retreat. The bitter taste of failure already thick in his mouth. And then the impossible. A lone A-10 had appeared on the radar. Falcon 7. Elena Marquez. He remembered watching her that day, not attacking, but shielding. She dove into the kill zone, forcing the enemy to fire on her, so the trap unit could escape. She turned herself into the magnet for death, circling again and again, surviving hit after hit, bleeding metal but never breaking away. She wasn't fighting for glory. She was buying time. She was protecting those soldiers until every last one was clear. Ellison had watched her bring back a half-destroyed jet, landing on a back road with an engine coughing and hydraulics gone. She hadn't escaped. She had returned. And she had saved them all. The narration broke in. She was not flying for rank, medals, or recognition. She flew because she knew what it meant to be abandoned. She flew for those who still had a chance. She wasn't a rogue. She was a compass, pointing to a duty higher than orders. Back in the present, the sound of the GAU-8 faded into the distance. The ops center was silent, still rattled by what they had just witnessed. Colonel Ellison stared at the console as the red enemy blips faded to neutral gray. It shouldn't have been possible. It defied logic. But it had just happened right in front of them. The young officer who whispered her name earlier now stood tall, all washing over his face. Even Miller, the unshakable radar tech, sat slack-jawed at his station. What just happened?" Someone finally muttered. The comms crackled again. A voice came through, shaky but alive. "Base, this is Echo 3. The artillery's gone. The pilot, whoever she is, I've never seen anything like that. Are you seeing this?" The room filled with raw emotion. Men they had already written off were alive. Ellison leaned into the mic, his voice steady, though disbelief still lingered in his tone. "Copy, Echo 3. We hear you. Confirm the damage." "Confirmed," came the reply, heavy with adrenaline. 3 gun emplacements, wiped out clean. No overshoot. No friendly fire. And she didn't even have target locks. Our systems couldn't see them, but she did. The room went still again. A young munitions tech had been running diagnostics the entire time. Her eyes widened as she read the numbers. "Sir, telemetry confirms it. She only fired 60 rounds. The silence deepened. Officers looked at each other, stunned. 60 rounds. Just 60. Most pilots would have unloaded triple that for a chance at the same effect. The narration cut in. The GAU-8 was designed for overwhelming firepower, for saturating a target in metal. To use it with surgical accuracy was to rewrite what the weapon was for. Ellison's voice cracked through the quiet. How the hell is that even possible? It wasn't a demand. It was the plea of a commander who had just witnessed the impossible. And then a new voice spoke, calm and heavy with the weight of experience. From the back of the room stepped Frank, a retired Warthog pilot who had flown combat longer than most of the staff had been alive. His eyes stayed fixed on the radar screen as he said quietly, "Sir, that kind of precision doesn't come from skill alone. That's decades of flying where a miss was never an option." Ellison's eyes locked on him. His curiosity now burned hotter than his disbelief. "What do you mean?" Frank drew in a breath. And for the first time, the room realized this was a truth only a handful of men had ever understood. "Colonel," Frank said quietly, "that's the kind of flying that only comes from a place where every single shot has to count. Where there's no backup, no fancy computer systems, no second chances. She's flown where a miss meant death. Hers or the soldiers she swore to protect. That's not training. That's survival." The words cut deep, drawing a picture of a pilot forged not by simulators or classrooms, but by brutal necessity. Ellison's thoughts snapped back to Elena Marquez, Falcon 7, the woman the system had discarded after Red Dagger. Now he understood. Her impossible skill wasn't an accident. The military had tried to crush her, to strip her of purpose. Instead, they had sharpened her into something unstoppable, a weapon, a force of nature beyond their control. Ellison's chest burned with questions. He needed answers. He needed to hear her voice. He seized the mic, his tone no longer commanding but pleading. "Falcon 7, respond. We need your debrief. We need your status. Come in." The room froze, waiting, silence. She wasn't there for medals, recognition, or even acknowledgement. She had come, done the impossible, and vanished. The comms officer scrambled, flipping frequencies, calling her again and again. Nothing. Falcon 7 had disappeared into the fog of war, leaving only the echo of what she had done. Then Echo 3's sergeant came through, his voice steady, heavy with respect. "Base, this is Echo 3. We're mobile, moving to extraction. That pilot, she saved all 12 of us." It was the final punctuation mark. No exaggeration. No dramatics. Just the truth. 12 lives saved by a woman who had broken every rule in the book. Ellison sank into his chair. The weight of it all pressed down on him. He had spent his life following procedure, trusting the book, believing that rules would deliver victory. Yet the rules had brought him an Echo 3 to the edge of disaster. And in the end, a rogue pilot, an outcast, had done what the system could not. He muttered under his breath, almost too low to hear. 12 men alive, because she ignored orders. If she'd listened, they'd all be dead. The irony hit like a knife. Hours ago, he had dismissed the A-10 as a relic, a blunt weapon unfit for modern battle. But in this moment, that rusty hammer had been the only tool capable of saving lives where all the advanced machines had failed. The silence in Fort Reagan's ops center was no longer heavy with dread. It was a silence, a miracle, a victory no one could fully accept. Ellison sat at his console, eyes glued to the empty radar screen, his worldview shattered. His career had been built on cause and effect, on data and documentation. Yet the last 10 minutes had burned all of that away. 12 men lived not because of planning, but because someone had chosen defiance. And that defiance had been flawless. As shock slowly gave way, the room shifted. Analysts and officers leaned closer to their stations, their professional curiosity erupting. This wasn't just survival. This was a phenomenon, a tactical impossibility. How? That was the only question now. Miller, the radar tech, had been replaying the data nonstop, his eyes locked on the numbers like a man desperate to prove the impossible wrong. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet, reverent. "Sir, I've been analyzing her flight path. This is something we've never seen before." Ellison leaned forward. "Show me." Miller pulled up a 3D projection of Falcon 7's route. The path glowed across the hollow map like an artist's stroke. She didn't just fly low. She used the terrain itself. She clung to the ridges, disappeared into mountain shadows. She stayed invisible to our radar the entire way. She was literally a ghost. The narrator cut in, "Modern aircraft rely on computers, automated systems, and stealth technology to do this. Falcon 7 had done it manually, by eye, by instinct, by raw experience, a skill nearly lost to time." Another officer, a young woman working analysis, looked up, her face pale. "Sir, her attack vector, it was perfect. She came in at an angle that gave her a clean line on the targets, while keeping herself out of enemy fire. It was precise, more precise than any pre-programmed drone strike we've ever logged. She planned it all in real time. It wasn't calculation. It was instinct." Her words caught in the air. "It's a work of art, sir." No one corrected her. In a place where numbers ruled, art was the only word that fit. Falcon 7 wasn't following orders. She was painting in fire and smoke. A junior analyst broke the silence, his voice shaky. "Sir, her flying was so exact, so intentional. It's like she knew where the targets were before she saw them." The narration added the chilling thought. This was more than flying. It was as if she had mapped the battlefield in her mind, seeing what technology couldn't. Ellison's thoughts shot back again to Red Dagger. He had seen this before, the impossible precision, the refusal to follow logic. The system had tried to erase her. Instead, it had created something mythic, something untouchable. He slammed his hand on the console, grabbing the mic again. "Falcon 7, respond. We need your debrief. We need your status." That's a direct command. "Return to base now." The words felt empty even as he said them. Authority had shifted. He wasn't commanding anymore. He was begging. Only static answered. The comms officer tried again, fingers flying over console. Still nothing. Falcon 7 had severed the line. Her mission was finished, and she had vanished. Finally, Miller's voice came again, quiet and grim. "Sir, the A-10's gone from scope. She's out of range." It was a final sentence, the last punctuation on what had just unfolded. She had come, she had done the impossible, and she had disappeared like smoke. Colonel Ellison stood alone in a room full of people, staring at the blank radar screen. The green blip was gone. All that remained was a victory no one could explain, a debt he could never repay, and a mystery that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Colonel Ellison turned slowly, fixing his stare on the young officer who had first mentioned the A-10. His voice was low, cold, and unshakable. "You said her call sign was retired after Red Dagger. You said she's not on any list." "Yes, sir," the junior officer replied, his tone still tinged with awe. "Then pull everything," Ellison ordered. "Every file, every scrap of paper. I want Operation Red Dagger. I want to know who Elena Marquez really is, why her name isn't anywhere. I want all of it." The words carried weight, not just curiosity, but a promise. Ellison wasn't chasing a tactical anomaly anymore. He was chasing a person, a pilot who had ignored orders, defied logic, and saved 12 men when the entire system had failed. From the back of the room, the retired A-10 pilot, Frank, spoke quietly. "Sir, those records are sealed. Restricted access. You'd need special clearance. Could take weeks." Ellison didn't blink. His eyes stayed locked on the empty radar, where the ghost blip had once been. "I don't care if it's buried under the Pentagon. Someone just saved 12 soldiers. The system abandoned them. She didn't. I want those files. Get me clearance. This isn't about a mission anymore. It's about a legend. And I need the truth." The narration cut in. The hunt for Falcon 7 had begun, not just for a rogue pilot, but for the buried story behind her existence. The operations center shifted. The chaos of battle had passed. Now it was like a library, quiet, sterile, but alive with purpose. The focus moved from the fight in -4 Zambia and Kwacha to the ghosts of the past. Ellison sat at the command console, staring into the void where her signal had vanished, demanding answers. Around him, his staff moved with new intensity. They weren't just officers anymore. They were investigators, digging through the layers of classified archives like archaeologists unearthing a forgotten truth. Warnings flashed across screens. Restricted. Classified. Clearance required. The system tried to resist, tried to bury what had been hidden. But then, after tense minutes, one file finally appeared on the main display. Operation Red Dagger. Elena Marquez, a senior officer, stepped forward, his face shadowed by memory. His voice was quiet, solemn. "I remember Red Dagger, Colonel. I was a junior then. We lost 6 aircraft, 22 crew. The intel was rotten from the start. The narration filled in the missing pieces. The strike had been doomed. Faulty intelligence missed the fact that the enemy was armed with mobile surface-to-air missiles and advanced jamming systems. The squadron flew straight into a trap. Comms were cut, GPS wiped out, radios filled with static. A clean strike turned into a massacre. Ellison's jaw tightened as the technician scrolled through the record. Line after line revealed the nightmare. His own signature appeared, his name on the document that had ordered the stand down. At the time, it was the only choice. Command had already written the survivors off as unrecoverable. The book demanded they be abandoned, but the file didn't end there. Buried deeper, hidden behind layers of clearance, was a redacted section no one outside a select few had ever seen. Her name appeared. Elena Marquez. She wasn't even assigned to Red Dagger. She had been on standby at a remote field, not scheduled to fly. Her name wasn't on the manifest, the comms roster, or the mission briefing. To command, she didn't matter. But then the radios went dark. Amid the static, she heard the fragments, shattered, terrified cries from dying men. And silence. The official order hit. Abort. Stand down. Survivors unrecoverable. But Elena made her choice. She launched. No clearance. No wingman. No support. Just her, an A-10, and a battlefield drowning in electronic blackout. No GPS. No satellite link. No comms. Only her eyes, her instincts, and the refusal to abandon her own. Ellison leaned closer to the display. His voice dropped to a whisper. "How did she find them?" The senior officer answered, his words heavy. "She didn't coordinate a rescue, sir. She was a rescue. She flew the shield." The narration unfolded. For 8 unbroken hours, she flew 17 runs through the kill zone. She drew fire, lit up enemy radars, and made herself the target over and over again. While she burned across the sky, medevac teams crept in, inch by inch, pulling out the wounded. She bought them what they needed most, time. On her last run, the sky finally caught her. A missile hit, hydraulics gone, engines failing, navigation dead. Any other pilot would have ejected, if the seat even still worked. She didn't. She stayed with the Warthog. She dragged it down hard onto a rural access road 20 meters from the zone. The jet was a broken shell, smoke pouring from its frame. But Elena crawled out, burned, bloodied, but alive. And so were all 18 men she had gone in for. Ellison clenched his fists, his jaw set tight. Then why was she suspended? The technician's voice was cold, bitter, because she disobeyed. Command had ruled those 18 as unrecoverable. She ignored the order. She saved them anyway. Ellison's face hardened, the weight of betrayal cutting deep. The technician scrolled further, reading the words that had been buried in a footnote, a line Elena herself had spoken at the hearing. Her response was simple, direct, final. "I won't apologize for saving 18 people. If that gets me kicked out, so be it." Her entire career, her entire legend, summed up in one line of unshakable conviction. The system had trained her, honored her, trusted her, and then it cast her aside for doing the one thing every soldier swears to do: save lives. The narration slowed, heavy, deliberate. Elena Marquez had been the finest rescue pilot they had ever produced, not because she followed procedure, but because she knew when procedure no longer mattered. And for that, they erased her name. But legends can't be erased. And now, after years in the shadows, she was flying again, The room sat in silence, the full story settling like a weight no one could shake. It wasn't just a tactical revelation. It was tragedy written in ink. Ellison stared at the file, at the signature that had ended her career, the same signature that had condemned 18 men to die. The irony burned like acid in his chest. And then the technician gasped. "Sir, there's more." On the screen appeared a second set of records, not official logs. These were hidden, cryptic reports compiled by an anonymous technician who had refused to let her memory vanish. The entries told of 17 unsanctioned rescues over the last 3 years. 17 times Command had ordered a stand down. 17 times Falcon 7 appeared. 0 deaths, 0 failures. The number echoed through the Operations Center. 17, not a coincidence, not a fluke, an entire secret career. Ellison rose to his feet and walked to the tactical map. The comms officer overlaid the data, connecting each mission cancellation to each ghost strike. "Every single one," she said. "Every time Command called it off. She was there within hours." Ellison's hand traced the lines across the map. It all fit. The impossible timing, the sudden appearances, the vanishing acts. The realization hit him hard. "She's tapped into our comms," he muttered. "She's listening, waiting for the calls we won't answer." The room went still, not from shock alone, but from the truth that now hung over them like a shadow. Falcon 7 wasn't just a rogue pilot. She was a phantom living in the blind spots of the system, a last resort who appeared only when Command failed. A legend built not on victories, but on tragedies. And now, she had saved Ellison's own men. The energy in the ops center shifted. The chaos had passed. The desperation was gone. In its place was something quieter, reflection. Colonel Marcus Ellison sat at his console, no longer haunted by her ghost, but guided by it. The sealed files had been opened, and though the case was closed on paper, it had ripped open something inside him that would never shut again. He was a commander shaped by rules. But now he had seen the truth, that sometimes rules weren't enough. Sometimes survival demanded defiance. Hours passed. Ellison poured through flight records, comparing Falcon 7's hidden rescues to canceled missions. The pattern was undeniable. A pilot working in the dark, saving men no one else would save. She was out there. A ghost. A guardian. Listening for the pleas Command ignored. But where was she now? The answer came not in encrypted comms or secret codes, but through a simple phone call. A security officer from Auxiliary Field C9, a forgotten strip at the edge of the base, reported an anomaly. "Sir, we have an unregistered A-10 on the tarmac. No flight plan. No transponder. No pilot. It just appeared." Ellison's pulse jumped. He didn't need a description. He already knew. He gave a single order, his voice sharp and sacred. "Lock it down. No one touches that plane. No evidence tags. No procedures. Secure the area. And wait for me." This wasn't just an order. It was reverence. Ellison made the drive himself, the long road to Auxiliary Field C9, a pilgrimage into the pre-dawn mist. He walked the last few hundred feet alone, a solitary man approaching a solitary machine. And there it was, the Warthog, its armor scarred, its presence undeniable, a relic from another era, sitting silent, yet carrying the weight of something more, a symbol of hope. Ellison touched the cold metal, running his hand along the skin of the aircraft. Then he climbed a ladder and stepped into her world. The cockpit wasn't the outdated wreck he expected. It was immaculate, every switch polished, every gauge pristine, the targeting systems rebuilt by hand, customized with care. It was a machine maintained not by regulation, but by devotion. On the dashboard, where a logbook should be, lay a single folded note. Ellison picked it up, hands trembling. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. The message simple. Not here for medals. Just for proof they made it. It wasn't meant for him. Not for Command. It was a promise she wrote to herself. Proof that her sacrifices were never wasted. Ellison was still staring at the note when a maintenance NCO approached. A veteran with weary eyes and a thick mustache, his voice respectful. "Sir, we haven't touched it, but I've looked it over. This bird's in better shape than half our fleet. Someone's been caring for it for years. Ellison handed him the note. Any idea where it's been? The NCO shook his head. No record, but from the mods and the wear, this jet's been flown solo. The armor's reinforced. The ammo rack's optimized. None of it's standard. Whoever did this, it was personal. And then another man arrived, a retired pilot who had spent his life in the Warthog. He looked at the aircraft the way a soldier looks at a fallen comrade. His voice was quiet, reverent. This isn't just a jet anymore. In her hands, it's something else entirely. This isn't maintenance, the veteran whispered, his eyes locked on the jet. This is love. Someone loves this plane. The words cut through Ellison like a blade of truth. He had seen her skill in the skies. But here, in the pristine cockpit of an aging Warthog, he saw her humanity. Falcon 7 wasn't bound to a contract or medals. She was bound to her purpose, to her jet, to the men on the ground who needed her. Ellison's wall of protocol finally cracked. Logic no longer mattered. What mattered was the truth before him. He turned to the sergeant, his voice steady. Move this aircraft to Hangar 7, behind security. Don't process it. Don't log it. Treat it as a reserve unit. Someone might need it again. The order marked the beginning of something new, unofficial, unspoken. The narration described the quiet transfer of the A-10. Hangar 7 became a shrine, hidden in plain sight. Whispers spread. Not whispers of failure, but of a legend. Pilots stopped by, studying the impossible modifications. Mechanics noted strange things. The jet was always clean, always fueled, always armed. Yet no work orders ever existed. A crew chief put it simply. It gets service when no one's looking. Security officers swore they saw shadows slipping in at night, vanishing before dawn. Ellison, when told, only smiled faintly. Maybe they're not meant to be caught. Some things work better when we stay out of the way. Quietly, he loosened rules around Hangar 7. After-hours access was never questioned. The base itself became a silent accomplice in the myth. When asked by his deputy what to call this arrangement, Ellison gave a simple answer that carried the weight of his transformation. Insurance, he said, for when the system doesn't show up. In the corner of Hangar 7, the Warthog became more than a machine. It was a monument, not carved from stone, but from hours of flight defiance and sacrifice. Word spread across the base, not shouted in briefings, but carried quietly between pre-flight checks and late-night watches. Pilots, rookies and veterans alike, found themselves drifting toward the hangar. Some came alone, others in pairs, standing silently before the jet as though before a war memorial. They studied the burn marks, the hand-modified panels, the custom targeting array, and always someone whispered, this wasn't built in a shop. This was carved in combat. It wasn't the hardware that drew them. It was what the Warthog represented. In a world bound by checklists, approvals, and chain of command, this aircraft stood as a symbol of what it meant to act when bureaucracy froze. It was an embodiment of the vow no one wanted to write down. No one gets left behind, not if she's still flying. Colonel Ellison, the man who had once dismissed the A-10 as obsolete, saw it now with new eyes. 12 men were alive because of that relic. And in the days that followed, he made a quiet decision. No reports, no reprimands, just acknowledgement. In Fort Reagan's HQ, he commissioned a plaque. No ceremony, no speeches. Just a steel plate etched with the silhouette of an A-10 flying low through fog. Beneath it, one word, Falcon 7. It spread on its own. New arrivals were led there quietly. No orders, just a nod, a gesture. And when they asked, who is Falcon 7? The answer was always soft. Someone who knew saving lives mattered more than following orders. The myth became more than a person. It became an idea. A philosophy passed from one pilot to another in low voices. Falcon 7 wasn't just a rogue. She was proof that courage didn't need permission. The base began to change. No declaration, no rule book rewrite, just an unspoken culture. When command called off a mission, when rescue was deemed too risky, eyes turned to Ellison. He never spoke, just gave a single nod. And then one untraceable frequency would open, never logged, never acknowledged, left waiting. Sometimes it stayed silent. Other times, a simple message flashed across the comms board like lightning in a storm. Falcon 7 in vicinity. No voice, no name, no call sign repeated. Just those words. And the room would change. Despair turned into something else, anticipation. Because that message meant one thing. Someone was still coming. Falcon 7 had become more than a pilot, more than a legend. She was a compass, a guardian, a presence that only appeared when others turned away. Not for glory, not for recognition, but because lives still hung in the balance. And she had already made her choice. Not on my watch. Hangar 7 became sacred ground. Everyone knew the rule. Don't ask how the jet stays ready. Don't question who slips inside at night. Just know that someone still believes. And years later, as Colonel Marcus Ellison stepped down from command, his legacy wasn't in medals or reports. It was in that plaque in the hallway, the silhouette of a low-flying A-10, and the quiet vow whispered across the base. Falcon 7 was still out there, watching, listening, waiting, not for medals, not for glory, but for the lives that needed her. Colonel Ellison stood before a room of pilots, his gaze locked on the steel plaque mounted in the hallway. His voice was calm, steady, carrying the weight of everything he had lived and learned. You'll face moments where the manual won't help you, he said. Times where the rule book doesn't match what's right. When that day comes, remember this. The mission isn't to follow the book. The mission is to bring your people home. It was the final lesson of his journey. A man who once lived only by protocol now spoke with the wisdom of someone who had seen those rules fail. Sometimes, he finished, the real work happens outside the wire. That doesn't make it wrong. That makes it necessary. After his farewell, a new note appeared inside the A-10's cockpit in Hangar 7. A crew chief found it and quietly left it there for the incoming commander. It read, "Thanks for knowing some things matter more than protocol." It was signed simply, R13. The meaning was clear. Falcon 7 had been watching, and in her own quiet way, she had offered her thanks. Colonel Sarah Chun, Ellison's hand-picked successor, inherited not just command of Fort Reagan, but the legend itself. She continued the insurance policy, and when asked about it, she echoed his words. Not all capabilities fit the standard model. That doesn't mean they should be discarded. Over the next 3 years, the Warthog in Hangar 7 launched 12 more times. Each mission came when the official system had said no. Each time, it returned in silence, vanishing without fanfare. The plaque became more than a marker. It became a creed passed from one generation of pilots to the next. Later, 8 words were quietly engraved beneath it. For those who fly when others choose not to, Falcon 7 was no longer a ghost. She had become part of the air they breathed, a reminder that duty was more than signatures and procedures. It was a promise. The story of Elena Marquez was not one of medals or parades. It was a story of sacrifice, of a pilot erased from a roster, but immortalized in whispers, a shadow guardian who flew not for the system, but for those left behind, a myth born from tragedy, sustained by courage and remembered as truth. Ellison's own transformation was just as profound, a commander defined by the rulebook, forced to face the limits of his own system, and chained forever by one act of impossible defiance. His legacy was not just in victories, but in acknowledging that sometimes true command means recognizing when rules are cage. And Falcon 7? She was never a rebel for the sake of rebellion. She was a hero for the sake of survival. Her precision was not simply skill. It was a vow born from failure, forged into a promise that no soldier would ever be abandoned again. Her A-10 was more than an aircraft. It was a partner, a monument of steel and fire, maintained with love and flown with conviction. Together, they became a symbol, not of technology, but of spirit, a living reminder that courage doesn't wait for permission. The plaque, the open frequency, the spotless jet waiting in Hangar 7. They were all quiet signals of a truth that could never be written into doctrine. The greatest act of honor are often the ones that never make it into the record books. And that, my friends, is why this story matters. This is the story of Falcon 7, a pilot who gave up her career to hold onto her code, a woman who flew into the fire not for rank, not for recognition, but because lives were on the line. It is a story of defiance, of quiet courage, and of a promise kept. And here at Veteran Biker, it's a story we'll never let fade. So now we ask you, what does duty mean to you? Is it obeying every rule? Or is it doing what's right? Even if it means standing alone? Would you have flown that mission? Would you have left the channel open? Drop your answers in the comments. We read every single one. And if you believe that some things matter more than protocol, if you believe in the power of the individual, then hit subscribe. That's how we make sure these legends live on. For more stories of defiance, of honor, and of roads less traveled, check out the videos on your screen now. Until next time, ride your own path, and never forget the ones who chose to fly. On the map, a single red icon pulsed with urgency. Echo Unit 3. 12 men cornered in the hostile terrain of Red Zone -4 Zambian Kwacha. The comms came through fractured, static-filled, but the picture was clear enough. They were pinned inside a ravine, surrounded by a well-prepared enemy, and running out of time. The last coherent message had been a cry for air support, cut off by the sound of an explosion. Colonel Marcus Ellison leaned in, his voice low and steady but strained. "Comms, what's the latest?" The young communications officer, hand shaking, swiped frantically across his console. "Sir, signals are breaking up. The enemy's jamming us heavy. We can't get a clean lock." The last message, it was a request for immediate cover. They said they're out of time. The word struck like a sentence of death. The entire room froze, holding its breath. Ellison didn't need video feeds to imagine what was happening. He knew it. The chaos of being trapped under fire, no cover to run to, the helplessness of waiting for a rescue that wasn't coming. He had lived it decades earlier, and the memory cut like ice through his gut. "Air assets," he barked, turning to Flight Operations Officer. "Status on everything we've got." The officer rattled off the facts quickly, her voice clipped and grim. F-35 fleet is grounded. Targeting array issue. Still waiting on a manufacturer patch. F-18s are locked at Auxiliary Field C9, mid-refuel for Operation Sandstorm. That mission can't be aborted. It's a Priority 1 supply run. Weather north of -4 Zambian Kwacha. Microburst storm, low altitude is suicide. "Sir, we've got nothing. No support available." Her last words cut deeper. Earliest F-18 arrival, 42 minutes. 42 minutes. For Echo 3, it might as well have been forever. Ellison rubbed a hand across his face, stubble rough against his palm. The book, the sacred manual of protocols, told him to wait, to accept the loss. But the thought of 12 men dying while he hid behind procedure was poison. His fist slammed against the table. The crack echoed through the room. "Damn the book. To hell with the manual. I don't give a damn about reports." His voice dropped into a guttural growl. "Find me anything that flies. I don't care what it is. A jet, a helo, a damn crop duster. Anything that can put shadow over that valley and give those men a chance. I just need 5 minutes. Get me a bird in the air." For the first time, his staff saw him break. Their normally unshakable commander revealed raw fury. They scrambled into motion, fingers flying across consoles, combing every record for something, anything. And then, quietly, a voice rose from the back of the room. A junior officer, hesitant, eyes glued to his screen. "Sir, we have one pilot ready. An A-10 pilot. Her birds fueled and armed at Auxiliary Field." The words landed like a shockwave. Ellison turned slowly, his face carved in disbelief. "An A-10?" he repeated, his voice thick with contempt. "That's what you're giving me? A relic? A bulldozer with wings? I need a scalpel, not a hammer from a museum." His voice rose, anger spilling out. "I asked for a jet, a real jet, a stealth asset that can strike and vanish. Not some flying fossil older than the pilot herself." He dismissed the officer with a harsh wave. Turning back to the tactical map, reality settled back in. Echo 3 would die before support arrived. Another after-action report would be written. More letters sent to families. The cycle would continue. And then, a voice from the radar station. Miller, the grizzled tech, his monotone suddenly sharp. "Sir, I've got a new contact." The room went still. Ellison froze, eyes snapping toward him. "Identify." "No transponder," Miller said, fingers racing over his console. "Not a malfunction. I'm getting a clear return. Low altitude. Hugging the terrain. Moving fast. Heading straight for -4 Zambian Kwacha." Every screen shifted. A lone green blip. Sliced across the map. Unauthorized. Silent. Relentless. The entire room locked onto it, eyes wide. This wasn't a patrol. It wasn't a scheduled flight. It was something else. Ellison's stomach dropped. He knew that flight path. He knew the way it skimmed the hills, weaving through ravines, pushing speed to the edge of recklessness. It wasn't a rookie. It wasn't sanctioned. It was a hunter, a predator closing on its target. A shiver ran through him. This wasn't just a rogue contact. It was a ghost from his past, a nightmare he had tried to bury. He turned to the young officer who had first mentioned the A-10. The man's face was pale, caught between fear and awe. His words came out like a whisper to the entire room, not just Ellison. "There's only one pilot who flies like that, and she's not supposed to exist." The words unlocked the door Ellison had tried to seal shut. Memories flooded back. Operation Red Dagger. The blackout. The jammers. The dying calls from men command had written off. Back then, the F-18s had been too far. The F-35s grounded. The order had been clear. Stand down. But one pilot refused. A woman with steel in her eyes and fire in her veins. Elena Marquez. Call sign, Falcon 7. Ellison remembered the radar feed. Her A-10 cutting into the firestorm, ignoring every direct order, every threat of court-martial. Flying blind, relying only on her instincts, her understanding of the battlefield. The system had punished her, stripped her rank, ended her career. But 19 men had lived because of her. 19 soldiers who had been written off were alive because she had chosen duty to her brothers over duty to the rulebook. And now, years later, that same ghost had returned. The brutal flashback faded, leaving Colonel Ellison staring at the glowing green blip cutting across the radar. He didn't need anyone to tell him. It was her. Falcon 7. Same reckless flight path, same impossible maneuvering, same refusal to obey logic, protocol, or common sense. She had heard Echo 3's desperate cry and was answering, just like she had all those years ago. A ghost pilot in a ghost jet, coming for a ghost squad. Ellison felt awe, fear, and respect mix in his chest. He knew exactly what she was about to do, and he knew, with chilling certainty, that nothing he said or did could stop her. The board had just been flipped, and the one person who wasn't supposed to exist now controlled the game. The ops center froze. The hum of servers filled the silence as every eye locked on the radar screen. A single green blip carved across the map with unshakable purpose. Ellison stood rigid at the console, his posture no longer the hardened commander, but a man confronted by a past he had tried to bury. He had lived his entire career by the book, but Falcon 7 was proof that some truths lived outside its pages. She was a contradiction to everything he believed in. Inside, a war raged. She's a liability, a rogue, a violation of every order. But another voice whispered louder. She's the only chance those men have. The system has failed them. She hasn't. His hand trembled as he reached for the comms mic. He straightened, forcing himself back into the role of commander. His voice came out cold, sharp, cutting through the room. "Unidentified A-10. State your ID and return to base." That is a direct order. The room waited. Static answered. Miller, the radar tech, looked up nervously. "Sir, she's flying silent. Either she's not receiving, or she's ignoring us. But her course is locked, dead on Echo 3's position." Ellison's jaw tightened. This wasn't an accident. This was intent. He gripped the mic tighter, knuckles white. "Falcon 7, I know who you are. This is a direct command. You are not cleared for this mission. Return to base immediately. Do not force me to classify you as hostile. The words rang hollow. They both knew he couldn't and wouldn't authorize a strike on an American pilot racing to save American soldiers. He was trapped in his own paradox. And then, through the static, a calm, steady voice cut through, female, composed, unwavering. This is Falcon 7. I hear you, Colonel. Echo 3 needs support. I am in position to provide it. There was no arrogance in her tone, no rebellion, just fact, spoken with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her purpose. She wasn't asking. She was declaring the mission as she saw it. Ellison's chest tightened. He could cling to rules and watch Echo 3 be slaughtered, or accept the truth that the only thing standing between those men and death was a woman the system had erased. Then the comms officer's console erupted with a transmission from the ground, raw, desperate, almost broken. Any air support at all, please. We're out of time. Heavy fire. We can't hold. The plea shredded the sterile silence of the command center. Every person in the room felt it. Ellison's eyes darted from the radar, where Falcon 7's blip closed in, to the map where Echo 3's icon flickered under a swarm of enemy markers. His hand slammed the mic. He closed his eyes for just a moment. The decision wasn't his anymore. His men's cries had already made it for him. He inhaled deeply. His voice, when it came, was not command, but surrender. Falcon 7, you are cleared to engage. He didn't wait for confirmation. He didn't need to. He knew she was already diving. She had stopped waiting for orders long ago, after the days she waited too long, and lost people she swore to protect. The room held its breath. On the radar, Falcon 7's blip dipped lower, vanishing into the terrain, gone from the screen, but racing with deadly intent. On the ground, Echo 3 huddled behind rocks, down to their last rounds. Their eyes searched the fog above, knowing nothing was coming, until they heard it. Not the distant roar of a fighter jet, but a guttural growl that shook the earth itself. Through the haze, the unmistakable silhouette emerged, the A-10 Warthog, a flying tank, cutting so low it seemed part of terrain. On the ground, a sergeant shouted, voice cracking with joy and disbelief. That's a Warthog. We've got air. We've got air. In the ops room, all eyes locked on the screen. Miller whispered in disbelief. She's flying visual in this fog? Sir, there's no way she can get a lock. His words carried the weight of impossibility. But before anyone could respond, the room shook with the deafening roar of the GU-8 Avenger. The voiceover explained, the GU-8 wasn't just a weapon. It was a force of nature. A 7-barrel Gatling gun firing nearly 4,000 rounds per minute. The sound was a simple gunfire. It was 1,000 chainsaws tearing the air. On the map, enemy artillery blips lit up in fire and smoke, one after another. On the ground, Echo 3 roared with cheers, relief and raw survival flowing through their broken voices. In the ops center, Ellison watched, awe and dread mixing inside him. He knew the truth. No modern aircraft could have pulled a lock in that fog, not under that jamming. This wasn't technology. This was skill, pure human skill, analog mastery in a digital world. What they were witnessing wasn't luck, and it wasn't technology. It was a raw mastery of a pilot who had turned survival itself into an art form. As the last enemy blips vanished from the map under a storm-precise cannon fire, Ellison felt an old memory claw its way to the surface. Not a mission he had commanded, but of one he had failed, Operation Red Dagger. He remembered the chaos as if it were yesterday. A recon unit trapped, communications blacked out, jammers shredding every signal. The book had said the mission was lost, too risky, too costly. He had given the order to abort. And then, out of nowhere, an unregistered A-10 appeared on radar. A rogue blip, a defiant act. Elena Marquez, Falcon 7. He could still see it in his mind. She hadn't flown in to destroy. She had flown in to shield. She made herself a target, deliberately drawing fire away from trapped soldiers so rescue teams could inch their way in. Run after run, she skimmed the treetops, triggering radar, pulling fire, taunting the enemy. Hours of this brutal dance. death snapping at her heels every second. It wasn't the memory of a warrior. It was a memory of a guardian. Ellison remembered the surge of awe, shame, and fury as he watched her defy every order, every expectation, every limit of what he thought possible. And then impossibly she returned, her A-10 torn apart, engines dying, hydraulics gone, skidding onto a rural road. A wreck, but still alive. She hadn't escaped. She came back because she refused to leave anyone behind. The narration cut back to the present. She wasn't flying for medals. She wasn't flying for recognition. She flew because she knew what it felt like to be left for dead, and she would never let that happen to anyone else. Falcon 7 was no rogue. She was a compass, pointing to a duty higher than orders. Ellison watched her on the screen, GU-8 fire echoing in his mind, fading like thunder rolling away. He realized he wasn't just observing a mission. He was watching a legend being written in real time. The ops center fell silent. The roar of the cannon was gone, but its echo lived in everyone's chest. A silence deeper than before, the silence of people who had just witnessed a miracle. Ellison stood motionless, eyes locked on the console. The hostile red markers that surrounded Echo 3 were gone, replaced by gray, lifeless smudges. What had just happened was impossible, and yet undeniable. The junior officer who had first spoken her name stared at the screen, his face lit with awe, no longer afraid, vindicated. Even Miller, the radar veteran who never flinched, looked shaken, whispering under his breath, What just happened?" No one answered, and then the comms crackled. A voice came through, shaking with adrenaline and relief. "Base, this is Echo 3. The artillery is gone. That pilot, I've never seen anything like it. Are you getting this?" A wave of raw emotion swept through the ops room. 12 men who had been seconds from death were still alive. Ellison steadied himself, leaning into the mic, his voice flat but edged with disbelief. "Copy, Echo 3. Loud and clear. Confirm the damage." The reply came, trembling with awe. "Confirmed. 3 hidden gun emplacements destroyed. No friendly fire. No collateral. All without target locks. Sir, our own systems couldn't even find those positions." The room fell silent again. It bordered on the supernatural. The munitions tech broke the silence, her face pale. "Sir, I pulled the telemetry. She fired only 60 rounds." The words hit the room like a physical blow. 60? Another officer repeated, almost gasping. Most pilots would burn through 3 times that, maybe more, to take out even a single site. To destroy 3 with only 60? It was unthinkable. The voiceover explained what everyone knew. The GU-8 was a weapon of brute force, built to obliterate targets by sheer overwhelming volume. To use it with surgical precision wasn't just unlikely, it defied its very design. Like carving a diamond with a sledgehammer. Ellison scanned the room, his own disbelief mirrored in every face. "How the hell is that even possible?" he asked. Not a demand for facts, but an appeal for understanding. And then, from the shadows, a voice spoke. Calm, low, weathered by decades of experience. It was Frank, the retired Warthog pilot who had been watching quietly all along. A man who had flown the A-10 for 30 years and lived through more combat than most of the room combined. "That's not just skill, Colonel," he said evenly, his eyes fixed on the radar. "That's what happens when you've flown in places where missing was an option, where every single round had to count. No second chances. No backup. Just you, the bird, and the people you had to save." Ellison turned, eyes narrowing with curiosity now sharpened into fire. "What do you mean?" Frank took a long breath, his voice becoming a quiet narration. "I mean, she's flown in wars no one here even remembers, where the difference between life and death was one pull of the trigger. She's not trained for simulations. She's forged in necessity. That kind of precision comes from years of knowing that a single miss didn't just fail the mission. It killed someone you swore to protect." The room listened, spellbound. Ellison's mind went back to Red Dagger, to the pilot they had thrown out for breaking rules. He finally understood. The system had tried to bury her. Instead, it had created something else. Something sharper, deadlier, untouchable. Elena Marquez, Falcon 7, wasn't a relic. She was a weapon they couldn't control. Ellison felt a surge of questions, a desperate need to speak to her, to understand her. He grabbed the mic, his voice urgent, not commanding. Falcon 7, come in. We need your debrief. We need your status. The room held its breath. Static. Nothing. She was gone. Not for praise. Not for medals. Not for recognition. She had come to do the job. And now she had vanished again. The comms officer switched frequencies, searching frantically, but it was pointless. Falcon 7 had gone silent. The ghost had done what she came to do. Falcon 7 was gone. Just as quickly as she appeared, she had vanished into the sky, leaving nothing behind but silence and disbelief. Then, through the static, a final transmission broke in from the ground. It was the sergeant of Echo 3, his voice steady but full of quiet reverence. Base, this is Echo 3. We're mobile, moving to the extraction point now. Just wanted to say, whoever that pilot was, she saved all 12 of us. The words landed like a closing chapter. Simple, final, unforgettable. Ellison slumped into his chair, the weight of the moment crushing down on him. He had done everything by the book, followed procedure, relied on protocol, and it all pointed toward one horrifying conclusion. Echo 3 was supposed to die. Yet here they were, alive, because someone broke every rule he had sworn to uphold. His voice, barely more than a whisper, betrayed the shift tearing through his worldview. 12 men alive because she ignored orders. If she had listened, they'd all be dead. The bitter irony clawed at him. Minutes earlier, he had mocked the A-10 as nothing more than a relic, a rusty hammer from another era. But in the end, that rusty hammer had been the only tool capable of saving lives when every modern marvel had failed. The room held its breath in a silence that wasn't defeat, but something far more unsettling. It was a silence of victory born out of defiance. Ellison sat at the console, staring at his blank screens, a man caught between logic and the impossible reality he had just lived through. His entire career had been built on the certainty that every cause had a measured effect, that every outcome could be documented, explained, filed. But the last 10 minutes had shattered that certainty. 12 men were alive not because of flawless planning, but because of one act of outright rebellion. The shock began to give way to something else. Curiosity, a gnawing, feverish need to understand. How? That was the question bouncing silently across the room. How had one unauthorized A-10 pulled off what the most advanced systems couldn't even attempt? This wasn't just a win. It was an anomaly, a tactical, technological impossibility. Radar Tech Miller sat hunched at his console, eyes fixed on his screen. He wasn't trying to celebrate. He was trying to prove what he'd just seen couldn't be real. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, almost reverent. Sir, I've been running her flight path. The raw data. This is something else entirely. Miller wasn't known for exaggeration. His tone alone was enough to freeze the room. What is it, Miller? Ellison demanded, his voice sharp, but edged with something closer to desperation than command. The holographic replay bloomed over the table, the A-10's route unfolding in 3 dimensions. Miller explained, his fingers tracing every movement. She didn't just fly low. She used the terrain itself. She hid in ridges, slipped into mountain shadows, weaving herself invisible. She was below radar the entire way. Sir, she wasn't just flying. She was a ghost. A quiet murmur rippled through the staff. The voiceover cut in. In modern aviation, those tactics were relics, lost arts replaced by automated terrain following systems and stealth technology. But Falcon 7 wasn't leaning on machines. She had done it all manually, with nothing but instinct, training, and an uncanny sense of the land beneath her. Another officer, pale and wide-eyed, lifted her head from her console. Her attack vector... Sir, she chose an angle that gave her perfect sightlines while leaving her almost untouchable from enemy fire. She planned it in real time. It's cleaner than any drone-assisted strike I've ever logged. Her voice faltered. It's not strategy. It's art. The word struck everyone like a thunderclap. Art in a war room, in a battle defined by data streams and protocols. Falcon 7's strike had been described as a masterpiece, and no one could argue. But the awe didn't erase the creeping dread. A young analyst, barely more than a trainee, spoke in a voice that trembled with fear. "Sir, it feels like she knew where those targets were before she even saw them, like she mapped the battlefield in her head before she got there." The realization was chilling. This wasn't just flying. It was something beyond technology, an intuitive, almost unnatural understanding of combat that made even their most advanced systems look blind. Ellison's thoughts drifted back, unbidden, to Red Dagger, to the impossible precision he had seen once before, the same defiance of logic, the same breaking of rules. He finally understood. The system had tried to bury Elena Marquez, but in doing so, it had forged something it could never control, a legend. He leaned forward, gripping the mic, his voice raw with urgency. "Falcon 7, come in. We need your debrief. We need your status." That's a direct order. Return to base now. But the words sounded hollow, empty. He wasn't commanding anymore. He was pleading. The authority was gone. She held the power now. Dead air. Silence. The comms officer switched channels, hands flying over the console. But there was nothing. Falcon 7 had cut her link. She wasn't here for medals or debriefs or recognition. She had done her job, and she was gone. Miller broke the silence, his voice steady but heavy with finality. "Sir, the A-10's gone from scopes. She's out of range. Completely." It was the last punctuation on the night. She hadn't just appeared. She hadn't just defied everything they knew. She had disappeared again, leaving behind no trace but 12 living men and a room full of unanswered questions. Ellison stood frozen in place, staring at the blank radar. The ghost blip was gone. What he had left was a victory he couldn't explain, a pilot he couldn't find, a debt he couldn't repay, and a legend that had just stepped out of the shadows and into his life. The comms officer leaned forward, pointing to maps spread across the display. "All of them, sir. Every one of these missions lines up with a cancellation. Every single time Command pulled the plug, she flew in within hours." Ellison traced a web of lines with his finger. The dots told a story no one wanted to admit. Precision, timing, ghost-like appearances. It wasn't coincidence. It was a pattern. The voiceover cut in, carrying the weight of the realization. She's tapped into our comms. She's listening. She waits for the calls we don't answer. The air in the room turned heavy, not from the machines humming in the background, but from the truth that hung over them like a storm. Falcon 7 wasn't just a rogue pilot. She was a shadow the system couldn't control, a last resort, a human being who had sacrificed her life and career to answer the cries Command chose to ignore, a myth born not from triumph, but from tragedy. And now, after all those years, she had surfaced again inside Ellison's own operation, saving his men. The frenzy of Fort Reagan's ops center had faded. The storm of urgency that consumed them for days was gone, replaced by a quiet, contemplative hum. The screen still glowed. The data still streamed. But the focus was no longer on the battlefield. It was on the legend who had just touched their world. Colonel Marcus Ellison sat at his desk, staring at the closed files. The ghosts of his past weren't haunting him anymore. They were guiding him. He had seen both the collapse of the system he believed in and the undeniable triumph of someone who lived outside it. He was a commander in transition, wrestling with a truth both liberating and terrifying. Some things mattered more than rules. The voiceover described the hours that followed. Ellison pored over flight logs, cross-checking Falcon 7's rescues against official mission cancellations. The pattern was undeniable. She had been there, again and again, filling the void left every time the system looked away. He was no longer a skeptic. He had become a believer. He knew she was out there, listening, watching, waiting for the calls no one else would answer. The answer to where she was came not in a coded transmission, but in a routine phone call. A security officer from Auxiliary Field C9 reported an anomaly. "Sir, we've got an unregistered A-10 on the strip. No flight plan. No transponder. Cockpit's empty. It just appeared." Ellison's heart skipped. He didn't need a description. He already knew. The silhouette of the Warthog was carved into his mind. The ghost had returned. His reply was immediate, sharp, precise. Lock down the area. Secure perimeter. Don't touch it. Don't log it. Wait for me. This wasn't the voice of a commander giving routine orders. It was a voice of a man protecting something sacred. The narration followed his journey. Ellison left the sterile fluorescent world of the command center and drove through the pre-dawn mist to the lonely tarmac of Auxiliary Field C9. The last stretch he walked alone. And there it was, the A-10 Warthog, a relic of another war, standing silent on the strip like a sentinel. Its armor bore scars, its frame carried stories, yet it radiated strength, as though it had just returned from a battle no one else could fight. Ellison approached quietly, his hand brushing the cool, scarred skin of the jet. He climbed the ladder, pulling himself into the cockpit. Her world. It wasn't the wreckage of outdated machinery he expected. It was immaculate, every gauge spotless, every switch polished. The targeting systems, rebuilt from scratch, gleamed with obsessive care. This wasn't just maintenance. It was devotion. The smell of hydraulic fluid and metal filled the air, and on the dashboard, a single folded note. Ellison's hands trembled as he opened it. The handwriting was simple, clean, like her voice. The words pierced him. Not here for medals, just for proof they made it. It wasn't a message to him. It wasn't for the military. It was for herself. Proof that what she had done mattered. Before Ellison could process it, a maintenance NCO approached, his voice low with respect. "Sir, you ordered us not to touch it, but I've been studying it from a distance. This bird's cleaner than anything in our fleet. Someone's been looking after her. Serious care." Ellison handed him the note, still shaken by its honesty. "Any idea where it's been?" The NCO shook his head. "No record, sir, but the wear patterns, the mods, I'd say it's been flown solo for years. Reinforced armor, custom avionics, ammo rack set up for max output with zero waste. This isn't standard military upkeep. This is personal." Another veteran pilot, drawn by the whispers of a ghost jet, stepped into view. His eyes lingered on the A-10 with reverence born from decades in the cockpit. His voice dropped to a whisper. "This isn't just upkeep. This is love. Somebody loves this jet." The words hit Ellison harder than he expected. This wasn't about machines or protocol anymore. In her impossible precision, he had seen her skill. But here, in the cockpit, he saw her humanity. She wasn't a rogue machine. She was a woman bound to her purpose by love, by duty, by an unbreakable bond with the one thing that had never failed her. Her jet. Ellison's fortress of logic and regulation cracked for good. The rules didn't matter anymore. Only the truth in front of him did. He turned to the sergeant beside him, his voice steady with new conviction. "Move this aircraft to Hangar 7, behind security. Do not log it. Do not process it. Treat it like a reserve unit. Someone's going to need it again." That single order marked the beginning of something new. The Warthog was transferred quietly, without paperwork, without ceremony. Hangar 7, forgotten, neglected, became sacred ground, a shrine to a ghost pilot and her flying antique. The whispers spread quickly, not a protocol, but of a legend. Pilots began stopping by, eyes filled with respect, studying the impossible modifications and the signs of a life lived for something greater than rank or medals. And then the strange reports began. Ground crews swore the A-10 in Hangar 7 was always spotless, always fueled, always armed, always combat ready. Yet no maintenance logs ever appeared. A crew chief, baffled, finally muttered, "It's like she gets service when no one's watching." The security officers guarding the hangar told their own stories. Fleeting shadows slipping past every patrol, vanishing into the mist before dawn. When Ellison heard these accounts, he only smiled faintly. "Maybe they're not meant to be caught," he whispered. "Some things work better when we don't get in the way." He gave a quiet directive. Rules around after-hours access to Hangar 7 would remain flexible. Nothing was put in writing, but everyone understood. The base itself had become a silent partner to the legend. When his deputy asked what they should call this arrangement, Ellison's reply was short, final, an echo of the man he had become. We call insurance, for when the system doesn't show up. The narration closed on an image, Ellison placing a small engraved badge in the cockpit of the ghost jet. It came from the men of Echo 3, the words etched into the metal red. The Falcon 7, who saw before radar did. From that moment, the A-10 in Hangar 7 was no longer just a machine. It was a relic, a sentinel, a monument carved not from stone, but from flight hours, defiance, and impossible precision. Always pristine, always combat ready, never logged, never claimed. The rumors of the ghost Warthog spread faster than any official briefing ever could, not shouted in mess halls or barked across the tarmac, but carried in whispers beneath the roar of jet engines. Young trainees and grizzled veterans alike found their way to Hangar 7. Some came alone, others in small groups. They stood before the aircraft in silence, as if paying respects at a war memorial. Their eyes traced scorch marks, custom panels, the hand-modified targeting array. Inevitably, someone would whisper, "This wasn't built in a shop. This was carved in combat." Because it wasn't the machine that drew them. It was what it represented. In a world run by signatures and sign-offs, by permissions and protocols, this A-10 had become something else entirely, an emblem of what it meant to act when bureaucracy froze. A vow carved into steel, no one gets left behind. Ellison, once the man who had dismissed the Warthog as a relic, now saw it for what it truly was. He had watched 12 men live because of it, and in the days that followed, he made a decision. He would not log the event. He would not reprimand the breach. Instead, he would acknowledge it the only way that mattered. He commissioned a small plaque, mounted quietly in Fort Reagan's central hallway. No names, no rank, just a silhouette of an A-10 cutting low through fog, etched in matte steel. Below it, one word, Falcon 7. No speeches were given. No orders were issued, but word spread. Pilots and crew chiefs began to guide newcomers to it, with nothing more than a quiet gesture. And when someone inevitably asked who Falcon 7 was, the answer always came softly. Someone who knew saving lives mattered more than following orders. The myth grew. Falcon 7 was no longer just a rogue pilot who broke the rules. She had become an idea, a quiet doctrine passed from one soldier to another, a philosophy whispered between those who knew the cost of waiting too long for permission. That plaque, that unmarked Warthog, became the anchor for a new kind of leadership, not one built on signatures, but on courage, the courage to act when it mattered most. Years passed, but no one ever spoke her name with fanfare. There were no songs, no medals, just the unshakable belief that she was still out there, watching, listening. And slowly, the base itself changed. Ellison never declared it openly, but his people understood. Whenever a mission was deemed too dangerous, whenever command called for retreat, a quiet ritual began. The comms officer would glance at him, waiting for nothing more than a nod. Then an untraceable frequency, never recorded, never acknowledged, would be left open. Sometimes it remained silent. Other times, a single message appeared on the board. Falcon 7 in vicinity. No voice, no signature, nothing more. But the room would change in an instant. Despair became anticipation, because that signal meant only one thing. Someone was still coming. She was no longer just a pilot, not even just a legend. She was elemental, a compass, a shadow guardian who appeared only when others turned away, not for medals, not for redemption, but because lives were still down there, lives the system had written off. And she had made her choice clear time and again. Not on my watch. Hangar 7 became sacred ground. Crews, controllers, even janitors knew the rule. Don't ask how the jet stays spotless, fueled, and armed. Don't ask who slips in when the lights are low. Just know someone still believes in duty without condition. Falcon 7 wasn't just history. She was a reminder. Sometimes the bravest acts don't ask permission. They just take flight. The voiceover fast-forwarded 2 years. A quiet, somber day. Colonel Marcus Ellison's farewell. His time as commander was ending, but his legacy wasn't in reports or medals. It lived in the plaque on the wall, and in the unspoken promise woven into the fabric of the base. He stood before a room of pilots, eyes fixed on the plaque. His voice carried the calm weight of a man transformed. You'll face moments where the manual doesn't help, where what's right doesn't match what's written. When that happens, remember this. Your mission isn't to follow the book. It's to bring your people home. It was the final lesson of a commander who had once believed only in rules, now believing in those willing to fly outside them. Sometimes, he said, voice steady, the real work happens outside the wire. That doesn't make it wrong. That makes it vital. After the send-off, a note was found inside the cockpit of the A-10 in Hangar 7, left for the new commander. Simple, direct. Thanks for knowing some things matter more than protocol. Signed, R13. She had been watching. She had seen. And, in her quiet way, she had left her thanks. Ellison's successor, Colonel Sarah Chun, carried the torch. She kept Raven 13 in place, never doubting its worth. When challenged, she answered the same way Ellison once had. Not all capabilities fit the model. That doesn't mean they should be scrapped. The legend had become something more than rumor. It had become a timeless truth. For the next 3 years, the old Warthog kept returning. 12 missions, 12 appearances when official assets were grounded, and 12 times it disappeared the second the job was done. At Fort Reagan, the plaque became more than steel on a wall. It turned into a code, a message passed quietly from one group of pilots to the next. Years later, someone etched in one final line, "For those who fly when others refuse." The story of Falcon 7 was no longer a rumor. It was air itself, breathed in, carried forward, and repeated in whispers across every hangar and flight line. This wasn't about a medal or a ceremony or a parade. It was about a woman who traded her career for a promise, a pilot who refused to leave men behind. A legend built not on orders followed, but on orders ignored. Falcon 7 didn't just rescue lives. She rewrote what duty meant. Colonel Marcus Ellison, once a man who believed only in the manual, had his entire worldview shattered by one act of defiance. He learned that true leadership isn't about enforcing rules. It's about knowing when rules are the very thing that will kill your people. His journey from rigid officer to quiet guardian of a myth proved that even the hardest soldier can be changed by courage. He left behind more than records or commendations. He left behind an understanding. The system fails, and when it does, someone must still show up. And then there was Falcon 7, Elena Marquez, the pilot erased from every list, yet immortal in every retelling. She wasn't a rebel chasing glory. She was a protector chasing survival. Her precision wasn't just training. It was a vow born in the failure of Red Dagger, a vow that no one would be left to die if she had a chance to change it. Her Warthog was an antique. It was a monument, a partnership between machine and spirit that outlived every regulation that tried to bury it. Her legacy lived in the plaque, in the open channel left before every mission, and in the quiet belief of those who had seen what she could do. And it reminds us of this. The greatest heroes aren't always the ones who follow the plan. Sometimes they're the ones who rip it up and write their own. Honor isn't found in the medals you wear. It's found in knowing you did the right thing, even when it costs you everything. That's why this story matters to us here at Veteran Biker, because it's not just a war story. It's a road less traveled, not asphalt and chrome, but clouds and steel. It's the path of one pilot who flew alone because she refused to abandon her code. It's proof that a single act of defiance can outweigh an entire army of compliance. So now we turn it over to you. What does duty mean to you? Is it following the book, or is it standing up for what's right? Even if you have to do it by yourself, would you have flown that mission, or been the one to leave that channel open? Your answers, your stories, and your insights, that's what keeps this community alive. If you believe that some things matter more than protocol, if you believe in the strength of the individual, if you believe that legends should never be forgotten, then join us. Subscribe, share your story, and ride with us as we bring more of these untold journeys back into the light. Because some stories are too important to fade away.